Hello and welcome to the dungeon. I'm your host Rob, and in today's video we're going to be talking about one of my favorite combinations for multi-classing, and that is the Paladin Sorcerer. These classes really complement each other very, very well, and they also have a lot of innate synergy as well. They both use Charisma as a casting stat, which is pretty handy when you want. And plus, Paladins in general are going to want to have a decent Charisma because that's going to affect your aura and protection for saving throw bonuses. But in addition to that, the fact that you can add things like quicken casting to a melee character is just it's just a complete game changer actually. The fact that you can cast buffs, quicken cast them is phenomenal. Twin casting on buffs is phenomenal. So it was a combination where you're really going to be able to mesh the best of both. Now I want to point out this is actually a character that I played in our Dragon Heist and Dungeon of the Mad Mage campaign. Now, unfortunately, we didn't go all the way to 20 because I was hoping we would. I think the DM just kind of got burnt out on running it, so I don't know if we're going to go back or not. It doesn't look like it. But I did get to play it to like mid-levels, so I'll talk about the character I played, but I'm by no means saying that my character was the best or only way to play it. I don't even know if it was the most optimal or anything. I made a lot of roleplay choices and didn't necessarily min-max as much. So there's other ways that you could do it, and we're going to talk about some different variants as well. So like I said, I don't think that this was by any means the only way to play these characters. Another thing that I really like about the Sorcerer Paladin combination is that as you level up, the Sorcerer gets a lot more spell slots than a straight up Paladin would. And multi-classed, you still come out with way more spell slots than a pure Paladin has, which means you're going to actually have more smites as a multi-class character than you would as a pure paladin. Which, sorry paladins, that's just the way it goes. Sorcerers as well bring the ability to change spells into sorcery points and sorcery points into spell slots. Meaning that you could take spells you're not planning on casting, turn those into sorcery points, and then you can turn those sorcery points into lower level spells that you can then use for smites. It just means that the character has a lot of flexibility and a lot that paladins on their own don't necessarily have, while also bringing the heavy armor, the shield proficiencies, the weapons, the smiting abilities, etc. that a straight up sorcerer wouldn't have. It's really just the best of both worlds. I chose to go with Oath of Conquest for my paladin subclass, and I went with Divine Soul Sorcerer for my Sorcerer subclass. The reason I went with Oath of Conquest is, A, I wasn't planning on playing a lawful good character, I was lawful neutral, but I saw my guys being more about the law than about mercy, compassion, forgiveness, any of those kind of things. But since I knew I wasn't going to be playing to high level, I was planning on 6 to 8 levels of Paladin and then all the rest Sorcerer. I knew that I wasn't going to have access to 3rd level Paladin spells. So things like Oath of Vengeance, where you get haste, wasn't going to happen. Oath of Conquest, on the other hand, I had Armor of Agathis, which is a phenomenal spell if you're going to be in melee a lot. It's even better when you're able to quicken cast it, of course, and use it in the first round of combat while still making all your attacks. I was also going to have access to things like Bless from the sorcerer spell list, and I was planning on taking, Spiritual Weapon and Hold Person were the other two real standouts that I wanted as well from the Paladin spell list, both second level spells. And like I said, since I wasn't going to high level, I was only going to have a couple level Paladin spells, and I really just felt that Oath of Conquest brought a lot of that to the table. I quite liked it. You also have the Channel Divinity, similar to the War Cleric, where you could add a +10 to one of your attack rolls. So if you really, really needed to land that big attack and get in that super smite, you're almost guaranteed to be able to do it unless you roll a 1, pretty much. The Divine Soul Sorcerer, on the other hand, brings some nice things to the table as well. It brings Favor to the Gods, which is going to give you, once per short or long rest, the ability to add 2d4 to an attack roll or a saving throw. So again, I was going to be able to use that to land a big attack if I needed it, or, better yet, in my opinion, to make a crucial saving throw, probably a concentration saving throw. 2 die 4, especially if you're able to combine it with things like your Aura of Protection, where you're getting your Charisma bonus to your saving throws now. If you have Warcaster on top of that, you're almost never going to fail a concentration saving throw. And it's just going to allow you to be just phenomenal at maintaining those crucial spells. So something like a Spirit Guardians, if you take that from the Cleric spell list, or like any summons, like I was planning on taking things like Conscious Celestial, you know, you don't have to worry about maintaining concentration. It's almost never going to fail. Because you have advantage, you've got a +3 to 5, or even +6 in my case, to your Charisma save. And then if you need it, 2 die 4 on top of that. And the nice thing about it is you don't have to declare that one in advance. It specifically states that it can change the results of the dice roll. So you could roll your saving throw, realize you're about to fail, and then be like, wait, favor to the gods, and it can change the dice roll, even with the attack as well. Whereas most of these things, they have to be used after or before, you've determined the results of the dice. This one you can use after, and it can change the dice roll. The other nice thing about the Divine Soul Sorcerer, of course, one of its main draws, is that you get access to any of the Cleric spells. Anytime you take another level of Sorcerer and you get a spell, you can choose instead to choose a spell of equal or lower level from the Cleric list. So this means you're going to have access to the Paladin spell list, at least to low-level spells anyways. You're going to have your Oath spell list, you're going to have the Sorcerer spell list, and you're going to have the Cleric spell list. Unfortunately though, Sorcerers don't tend to have a lot of spells known. In fact, by 14th level, you have 13 known spells. So not even one per level as you start getting to higher levels. So it's nice that you're like able to look at it and say, hey, I've got all these different spell lists I can choose from, but when it's only like, oh great, choose 6 of them now, you know, it's a little underwhelming. But that's okay, I only wanted to choose a few standouts from the Cleric spell list anyways. In our particular case, I was going to be mostly a frontline guy, but we didn't have a dedicated healer. We had a druid, but he was going to be shape-changing, and so I knew that between me and him, we were going to essentially do the healing. And we were mostly going to rely on out of combat, probably. But in an emergency, it's nice to be able to have some heals. And the ability to twin spell, like something like, say, a heal spell, makes heal just a much better spell than it normally is. Even things like Healing Word or Cure Wounds. If you have multiple people who went down in a single round of combat, you could twin spell a Healing Word and bring 2 of them up with 1 bonus action, and then still make your actual attacks, or use a lay hands, or whatever else you need to do. So I think it's pretty solid as far as those kind of things go. I really felt that it was a good combination. On casters, I generally would prefer to be a Shadow Soul Sorcerer, but for melee characters, I like the option of being able to take some heals and some buffs and some of that type of stuff. And then you just want as broad a spell list as you can have. So those were the choices I made for subclasses. I'm going to talk a little about the spell choices I made. I'll just go through all the different levels of spells. I ended up only taking 6 levels of Paladin, and the plan was to go 14 levels of Sorcerer, which I never got to, of course. But because I went Oath of Conquest, I think there's a very strong argument that could be made for going 7 levels, because then you get your class aura, which makes it so that if anybody's frightened of you, their movement is reduced to 0. You can take the Fear spell from the Sorcerer spell list. You can take things like Wrathful Smite, which can cause a frightened effect on targets. And the ability to fear something and then lock it down so it doesn't try to run away is very, very nice. It can also be really powerful combined with certain allies. Bear in mind that the movement reduced to 0 means that you could actually knock something prone as well inside your fear aura, and because it requires half their movement to get up and they have no movement, they can't even stand up. It's a very powerful lockdown effect, and it's one that doesn't require you to sacrifice a bunch of damage. So I do think that there's a very strong argument that could be made there. I ended up not choosing it because at the time I thought we were going to get to level 20, and I kind of wanted to have a 9th level spell slot, even though I wasn't going to have 9th level spells. But just bear in mind that it's very strong. And if I would have gone with, say, an Oath of the Ancients Paladin, I would always take 7 levels, because the Aura of Warding is just so good that you really don't want to pass that up. Especially if you're taking 6 levels of Paladin, you might as well just take the 7th level. And then depending on if you want a lot of ability score increases or feats, you might even take an 8th level at that point. It does mean you're going to lose your 7th level spell, but you might not care about that as much as you care about having extra feats. At that point, it's kind of a trade-off. So I do think that those are viable options. Another option is to just take 2 levels of Paladin and go all the rest Sorcerer. It means that you're mostly going to play as a Sorcerer probably, but you're going to have the option of wearing heavy armor and using a shield if you like. So you're going to be way harder to hit than a typical Sorcerer. And if you get all the way to 20, you'll still be considered 19th level for spell casting purposes, because your 2 levels of Paladin will count as 1 full level of casting. You'll have things like Wish. You could take Foresight if you really wanted. I don't know if I would in that particular case, but it's an option. You can use things like Green Flame Blade and Booming Blade to make up for the fact that you only have 1 attack around. You can even attack once and then quicken cast a Green Flame or a Booming Blade, and smite off both of those. So your melee damage obviously isn't going to be as good, and you're not going to have the aura protection. But if you mostly just wanted to be a sorcerer and just wear heavy armor with the option of throwing in some smites, I think it's very viable. So anyways, on to my actual spell choice. For cantrips, I took Booming Blade, Green Flame Blade. I took Guidance because it's one of the best cantrips in the entire game. And I took Prestidigitation mostly because I was playing a noble, and he was always worried about slumming with all these peasants and catching diseases and whatnot, so he always liked to look his best and cast Prestidigitation on himself quite often, just to keep his armor in his just pristine condition. But obviously Minor Illusion is one of the best cantrips in the game, so that would have been a strong choice. As I got to higher levels, I wanted to have a range option, so I personally went with Toll the Dead just because it didn't require a hit roll, but Ray of Frost, Firebolt would have been strong options as well. For first level, from the Paladin spell list, I got Divine Favor and Shield of Faith. I also took a Wrathful Smite and Thunderous Smite. I don't think any of the Smite spells are great. I'd rather just use the spell slot to smite in most cases. But, I had more spell choices to take, so, I took them. But then once I got to 3rd level and I unlocked my Oath spells, I took Armor of Agathis, and I also took Command. And if I would have been going to 7th level for the Aura, I would have kept Wrathful Smite probably, but I didn't, so I didn't. From the Sorcerer spell list, obviously I took Shield, Absorb Elements. I don't think I picked it up right away, it was one I took later on. And like I said, I took Healing Word as my Divine Soul Sorcerer. I also got Bless for free because I went with the Lawful alignment, and as the Oath of Conquest Paladin, you get to choose a spell based on whatever your alignment is, right? And Bless is what you get for being lawful. You can get Bane, you can get some other ones, Cure Wounds, whatever, right? But Bless was a great choice anyways. It's one that I would have taken as a spell if I wasn't getting it for free from my Oath. At 2nd level, I took Misty Step. From the Paladin spell list, I took Aid, and of course I took Find Steed. That was my number 1 choice. From other Sorcerer spells, I took Mirror Image. Blur would have been a really strong consideration as well, but it requires your concentration. But the nice thing about Blur is that if you're wearing heavy armor, trying to hit you with disadvantage becomes almost impossible. If you've got like I took the defensive fighting style. So if you're wearing, let's say, regular plate mail with a shield and a defensive fighting style, 21 armor class, and now you're trying to hit that with disadvantage, you're almost never getting hit. So that's a very strong choice. You can also twin cast Blur, which makes it a very strong choice as well. And then once again from the Oath spell list, once I was high enough level to take them, I took Spiritual Weapon and Hold Person. At 3rd level, Spirit Guardians from the Sorcerer, or well, obviously from the cleric spell list, but as a Divine Soul Sorcerer. Counter spell, those were my first two choices. I later picked up Hypnotic Pattern. I probably would have taken Fear if I'd gone high enough to get the Fear aura, as I mentioned earlier. I think Hypnotic Pattern is a better spell generally, but in this particular case, combined with the aura, Fear would have been excellent. I also like the idea of taking Fear and Hypnotic Pattern. If you took something like Careful spellcasting instead of Twin, I think that Quicken is almost mandatory on this type of character. Not on sorcerers in general, but on a character like this where you want to be casting buffs and stuff like that on yourself, like an Armor of Agathis or a Bless. I mean, being able to use Bless on the round you cast it is just way better than not being able to use it on the round you cast it. You know, basically, it's just that simple. Spirit Guardians and stuff as well. Anything that you can quicken cast is just going to be a very strong choice, because now you can also use your regular attacks on top of that. For a regular sorcerer, if all you're going to do is quicken cast a spell and then throw like a firebolt or something, and it's not bad. I'm not saying it's terrible, don't do it. I'm not saying any of that. But I don't know that it's necessarily super strong. Whereas on a melee character, you know, the fact that I could cast haste in the first round and then get that extra movement and attack right from the moment I get to act is a complete game changer. You know, I talked about haste before, and one of the problems with haste is if you sacrifice your first action to cast haste, then you haven't got to make any attacks. So if I have 2 attacks a round, I've attacked 0. Now round 2 I get to attack 3 times, but I would have attacked 4 by now if I just attacked twice each round, and I wouldn't have used a 3rd level spell slot to do it. You know, so it's in the 3rd round I've now attacked 6 times with haste. I've attacked 6 times without haste, but I'm still down a spell slot because of haste. It's not until the 4th round or later where haste really starts to pay off. Now, like I said, you might be able to use the extra movement to get into combat in the first round, whereas normally you wouldn't have been able to, maybe, or you would have had to use a Misty Step or something, in which case haste was still a great choice. But I think a lot of times we look at haste as being this big damage boost, and it is, but only if the fight goes long enough. But with quicken casting, haste becomes a damage boost and a movement boost and an armor class boost, all right from the word go. And that just completely changes the nature of the combat, in my opinion. So I feel like on this character, quicken spell casting is a must. Twin was one I chose because I went with a lot of buffs and debuffs, you know, mostly buffs. I think that if you wanted to be more of a direct damage type of guy, and you wanted to be able to just throw down fireballs while not hitting yourself and your teammates, or hypnotic patterns, or fears, because you want to lock people down inside your fear aura, then I think that something like careful casting becomes a much, much more viable choice. If you wanted to just use it with like hold person combos and stuff, then hidden casting would be a very strong choice there. So, oh, and if you didn't want to pick a warcaster, then subtle casting becomes a lot better, because now you can avoid having to use somatic components, which is tough to do if you're using a sword and a shield and trying to cast spells at the same time. So I just thought I'd throw that out there right now. There's a lot of other options. Because you're only ever going to have 3 choices at max, you kind of need to be careful with the ones you pick. And like I said, I feel like Quicken is almost mandatory, so that's one of your choices spoken for. And the other one, you're not going to get to high level. You're going to have your 2 choices at Sorcerer level 3, whatever level you are when you hit Sorcerer 3. And you're not going to get the other one until like Sorcerer 10, I think. So it's going to be a while in the making before you get to choose a 3rd meta adjunct. So, you know, kind of have an idea of what you want to go in at the beginning and choose appropriately for that. So Fireball and Haste, like I said, would have been good choices as well. 4th level spells, I took Polymorph and I took Death Ward because I wanted to be able to, you know, buff. But I think Banishment becomes a very strong choice if you're going to be using it with heightened spells. Greater Invisibility, if you're not planning on tanking a lot, then, and you just want to double your chances of getting smites, crits, then that becomes a very strong choice. In our particular party, we had a Barbarian as the only other excuse me, the only other frontline fighter. So I knew I was going to be tanking a lot, I was going to be on the front lines a lot, so I wasn't really planning on being invisible, you know. But if you had a bunch of other frontline fighters already, then I think greater invisibility is just an amazing choice. If I would have taken careful, then I think Sickening Radiance is one that often gets overlooked, but it's actually an amazingly powerful spell. The problem is that it has friendly fire. But as a sorcerer, the ability to maybe try to avoid the friendly fire suddenly makes Sickening Radiance very, very, very strong. So it's one I would have looked at towards there. One of the nice things about Death Ward, one of the reasons I chose it, is because you can twin it. And there's some really weird things you can do, because if you have Find Steed, spells you cast on yourself are automatically getting twinned to your steed. So you could cast, say, Blur on yourself, for example, but twin it to an ally while riding your horse, and now all three of you have the Blur spell on you. You can do that with Mirror Image, you can do that with a bunch of different spells. If you get hit by a dragon, you can cast Absorb Elements to protect yourself while also protecting your steed at the same time. And you can twin that and protect somebody else who got hit by the dragon breath. So you can pull some really weird shenanigans with the combination of twin spell and your steed, allowing a single target spell to hit like 3 targets at once. So that can be a lot of fun, just trying to figure out different combos that you can use for that. So that was one of the reasons I took Death Ward, because I knew I was planning on twinning it a lot. For 5th level, Greater Restoration and Mass Cure Wounds were the ones I went with. Animate Objects is obviously a very strong choice. I love Animate Objects. And Hold Monster Hold Monster also, if I would have gone with Heightened Spellcasting, is very, very strong. But even as it is, I think it's still a decent choice. I never got high enough to take 6th or 7th level spells, which is unfortunate. But if I had, I was going to take Heal, because like I said, I was planning on twinning it. I don't necessarily think that Heal's super strong on its own. It's okay, but as a lot of people have discussed before, healing during combat tends to be way less efficient than just letting somebody get knocked unconscious and then bringing them back up. But personally, I don't really like that playstyle. It just seems kind of stupid to me to just let your allies get knocked unconscious. Just on a personal note, it kind of bugs me. So I, like to actually heal people. I don't know, just call me old-fashioned, I guess. Mass Suggestion is one of the most powerful spells in this level range that you can get. So obviously I took it. And because I wanted to have a bit of a summoning type of thing, and I liked this idea, the connection to the divine, because I'm a divine sorcerer, I took Planar Ally. Mental Prison is another one that I would have considered. I didn't end up taking it, but I would have taken Planar Ally. At 7th level, and this is where I would have maxed out. I was going to have 6 levels of Paladin, 14 levels of Sorcerer. So obviously 13 levels of Sorcerer will get you 7th level spells. Conjure Celestial, again, because I wanted that connection to the divine, and just I wanted to kind of have some conjurations in there. So I was going to take that. And Resurrection, if the Druid didn't take it, then I was going to have to. We had a wizard in the party, so if he didn't take Teleport, I was going to take Teleport. I think Divine Word and Prismatic Spray are also worthy considerations. I'm not as big on Finger of Death, but there is potential there if you're going to like twin it, I guess, or hide and spell it. But like I said before, at this point, you start fighting a lot of things with Legendary Resist, and I just find that Finger of Death starts to lose a lot of its oomph. That's not necessarily true if you're a Necromancer, because of course now you can use it to create undead that are permanently under your control. So for Necromancers, I would always take Finger of Death. But if you're not a Necromancer, it becomes a lot more optional, at least in my opinion. One thing I wanted to mention with Planar Ally and Conjure Celestial both is that if all you're using is the base monster manual, these spells are a lot weaker. You just have a lot fewer choices that you can make. And in the case of Conjure Celestial, you don't even get to choose what you pick. So it's easy to say, yeah, but Quaddle are awesome, because Quaddle are awesome. But your GM could be like, oh, wait, I get to pick, and I'm going to give you a Pegasus instead. And using a 7th level spell slot to conjure a 2nd or a CR2 ally can feel pretty underwhelming sometimes. But in our case, we use Volo's Guide to Monsters, plus the Monster Manual, plus More Than Kindness, plus, I mentioned before, Tome of Beasts and the Creature Codex. I actually did a review on Tome of Beasts just recently. So between all those books, we have a fairly wide range of things that you can summon, and I won't bother going through it all because it's a long list. But one thing I did to help the DM out is I just made a list of anything I could get with Conjure Celestial. I wrote down the CRs, and I wrote down which book they were from as well, and then I did the same thing for Planar Ally. And I wrote down, you know, what things I might be interested in trying to summon, as well as the CR ratings and stuff like that. Just to try to make it easier for my DM, so that he doesn't have to flip through 5 different books trying to find what creature to give me. I'll be like, hey, here's the list, you can choose from that. If I wasn't using Conjure Celestial and Planar Ally, then like I said, there's some other strong choices that you can make there too. So one of the things that I liked about this class, just to sort of sum things up in general, is that you are very, very versatile and could do a lot of things, but usually versatility also means you lack raw power in any given area. It's the jack of all trades, master of none type idea. But I didn't find that with this character. Your melee damage was up there with any paladin. In fact, it was actually better than most paladins, because you had the option of quicken casting a green flame blade or a booming blade. And you could even smite on top of that if you wanted. So your melee damage was actually better than a lot of other paladins. You had decent heals. I had a few summons. I could have taken Conjure Elemental. I think Conjure Elemental would have been a very strong choice as well. I just didn't, because I wanted my summons to kind of be thematic, and I liked the idea that, you know, I'm a Divine Soul Sorcerer. I've got, like, you know, blood of angels coursing through my veins from some distant ancestor, and it's that connection to the divine that allows me to summon these types of creatures and gives me the power to fuel my spells. And so I kind of liked that idea from a roleplay perspective. But I think Conjure Elemental is a great spell, and it would have been a very strong choice. Things to be aware of, like sort of precautionary, I guess, is that it will take you a long time to round out your character, because unless you're only going with the 2 levels of Paladin that I suggested earlier, if you're going 6, 7, or even 8 levels of Paladin, and then you want a bunch of Sorcerer levels as well, it's going to take you forever to get your high level spells. So you're just going to have to be aware of that, and just realize that, you know what, I might never have 9th level spells. In my case, I was going to cap out at 7th level spells, but I was going to have an 8th and a 9th level spell slot. So I was looking forward, I mean, I never got a chance, of course, because we never finished. But I was looking forward to casting like a Spirit Guardians as a 9th level spell slot, because that's 11 die 8 damage per round, persistent damage, while also snaring things, right, by giving them difficult terrain. And that's just a truckload of persistent damage. And you can quicken cast it and do it in round 1, while also like beating on something with your sword with your regular attacks. So, you know, and then the next round in a tough fight, you could even cast a spiritual weapon, and because it doesn't require concentration. And then you have your Spirit Guardians going, you have your spiritual weapon, you've got your melee attacks, you're smiting on top of that. It's pretty phenomenal to think about, actually, like just the amount that you could stack there. And the chances of failing your saving throws is very slim by high levels, because, like in our case, I talked about this in the campaign for the my Dragon Heist review, but we ended up getting, each one of the characters had the chance to buy one of the +2 to, you know, whatever stat books, right? And the Barbarian took the Strength book, so I had the Charisma book. But this also meant that I was going to have the potential, eventually, which I never got to, of having 22 Charisma. So +6 to all the saving throws, and, you know, everybody else in my party within 10 feet. But +6 to my saving throws, plus Warcaster, plus, I mean, I only had 14 Constitution, but that's an extra +2. So now we're looking at a +8 to my concentration saving throws with advantage, and once per short rest, I can use an extra 2 die 4 to help me pass that. I mean, you're almost never going to fail a concentration saving throw at that point. Your saving throws are just ridiculously good. I will say that, sorry, I'm still getting over my cold, and it's starting to catch up to me here in the late parts of this video. But you will have to make some difficult choices for ability score increases versus feats, because you're going to need strength to wear your armor, you're going to need strength to hit stuff with a sword, and you're going to need charisma for your spells and for your saving throws. And it's just a harsh fact of life that, you know, you're going to have to, because you're multi-classing and because you have 2 main stats you need to worry about, you're really going to be spread thin. And that's not going to leave you with a lot of room for other stuff. One thing to maybe consider, which I didn't do, but might be worth considering, would be taking 1 level of Hexblade, and then you can just leave your strength at 15 or 16. And you can just use your charisma for everything else. So you have enough strength to wear heavy armor now, and you can use your shield still. You know, so that's a possibility. Another possibility for other options is to start Sorcerer. So you start with proficiency on concentration saving throws, on your constitution saves. I think this becomes a much stronger option if you're not starting at first level. Like, say the DM says, hey, we're starting this campaign, everybody's going to start at level 7, for example. You might want to consider starting as a sorcerer. And especially if you're just planning on wearing medium armor, you're like, you know what, I can wear half plate, I don't need as much strength now. You know, I'll still use a shield, I'll have pretty decent armor class, I can still take the defensive fighting style. I'm not that far behind where someone in full plate was going to be, and I can, you know, have concentration saving throws, be proficient. I don't need Warcaster quite as much. You know, I think it gives you a nice option. But if you're starting at level 1, most character deaths happen in the first couple levels. Starting with a 10 for your hit points plus your con mod instead of a 6 plus your con mod is a massive difference maker. And the ability to wear heavy armor right off the bat is nice. You also have way better starting equipment as a paladin compared to a sorcerer. And again, that's something that doesn't matter when you're like 7th or 8th or 12th level or whatever, right? But when you're level 1, your starting equipment is all you've got. And so I think that starting with some chainmail and a shield is going to be a lot stronger option, and it's just going to increase your chances of survival at low levels by quite a bit, actually. So, like I said, I think that's a different way to build it. I think another variant would have been to take 1 level of Hexblade, maybe not even right off the bat. Maybe you start with a couple levels of power, 1 level of Hexblade, just so you can get your charisma as your attack stat and your spellcasting stat. And then you never have to worry about strength for ASIs. You just, you know, you start with 16 strength, 16 charisma, for example. If you're using like a point buy or a standard array, depending on your racial choices, you can probably get to 16 in both. And then you just leave it there. And I think that's perfectly fine. It does mean, though, that you're going to be delayed even further on your spellcasting. But it also means you're going to have 1 patch spell slot that's going to be charged on a short rest. And, you know, I talked about this a bunch in other videos, but that's not a bad thing either if you're a paladin. And it gives you the option of casting things like Shield as your short rest spell, so it's just going to come back all the time. I think it's pretty strong. Another option, of course, would have been to change the subclasses. I think that Oath of Conquest, to me, was the one that offered the best spell list for 1st and 2nd level spells. But if you were going higher, some of the other ones have a lot. Also, your Channel Divinity on Oath of Conquest, I don't think is super great. So, I mean, the plus 10 is nice, but it's very rare that I really, really desperately need to hit something that bad. And if you did, you've also got the Sorcerer one that kind of serves the same purpose, right, with the plus 2 die 4. So I think that there's options of changing that. Like I said, I really like the Divine Soul choice, so I probably would keep that almost no matter what. I think Paladin's a little more negotiable. There's multiple good choices there. So, anyways, my voice is starting to get fade, and I've been talking more than long enough on this subject, I think. But I just wanted to talk about one of my favorites and give you guys my insights into it, as well as give you some suggestions of both how I did it, but also other ways that you might want to do it. Because like I said earlier, I don't think that I necessarily did like the best min-maxing only way, or nothing like that, you know? So it's a fun way to play the class. It's going to be very strategic because you're often choosing, you know, what spells you use, whether or not you want to be like converting sorcery points into smites and vice versa. Unlike, say, a lot of melee classes where it's just, do I attack or do I attack? You know, this one has a lot of strategic options, and that made it a very fun class to play. It was a very engaging class as well. So I do think that it has a lot to offer. If you've played one or have played other variations of it, let me know in the comment section. As always, I promise to read every comment. So even if you just thought it was kind of a cool idea, or you're like, hey, I've never really multi-classed, but it's something I've been kind of thinking about, you know, this is one of the strongest choices you can make. If you're going to dip your toes into multi-classing for the first time, I would highly recommend Paladin Sorcerer as the combination to go to. It's one of the strongest ones. So anyways, hit the like button, hit the notification button, leave comments in the comment section, and thank you for watching. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.